Welcome, we're having our first compost building workshop. I'm Tom Clevenger with the Zero Waste community group here in Yellow Springs. I'm joined here with...
Hi, I'm Mandy. I'm a local villager and also a composter, and I have a training in horticulture from the New York Botanical Garden and the Brooklyn Botanical Garden in New York.
And today we're going to be building a simple compost container that people that are homeowners here in the village, or anywhere for that matter, can build themselves with just a few tools. But first we'll talk briefly about why composting is such a beneficial thing. 20 to 30% of our household waste is food waste that can be composted that currently goes off to the landfill. This increases landfill mass, tipping fees, and also adds to methane emissions, which is one of the strongest greenhouse gases out there. So by composting, you help lower your carbon footprint and the carbon footprint of your community through lighter tear weights of trucks. Additionally, the product can be used at the end on household plants or gardens, and we'll discuss that after we do the build, what that looks like. So what if I don't garden? Well, if you don't garden but still produce good compost, I'm sure you're going to be able to find a gardener nearby that would love to use your compost from you, or you can use it in your household plants. Let's see. Now for this build today, it's a simple pallet build. Most average pallets are 40 by 48 inches long, and that's what all these pallets are. We're not going to be using any nails. We don't need to. We're going to be using this 55-pound test wire for build. Obviously going to need some wire cutters. And gloves are always good when you're dealing with pallets and wood and wire, because you don't want to cut or splinter yourself. A shovel. We started out with this area. I want to thank Brett and Isis Henderson for being our first victims, first recipients of a compost bin here.
Hallelujah.
And we selected this spot, and it wasn't quite level when we got here, so we leveled it off to allow the bins to stand. And we also wanted to make sure the earth was bare. This allows little wormies and microorganisms to come up from the ground and interact with your compost pile, which is a nice thing. So let's get to the build real quick. Typically, there's excess pallets found in any large or small construction project, and you can see them, you can follow a Lowe's truck around, but usually you can see big construction projects going on. And many contractors are happy not to have to pay to get rid of the pallets. They'll just throw them in a roll-off otherwise, so ask them if you can take the pallets. Always nice to ask first, and you can usually get 3 or 4 pretty easy. These actually came from Yellow Springs Brewery, who's doing their expansion right now. They had a bunch of wood waste and some pallets in there, so able to grab a few of those. I was able to rig them into my car in a way that they'd actually go down the street, but I don't think it was quite legal the way that but it's better if you have a friend with a truck or know a villager with a truck that can help you get these around. Now the good thing when you level these out like this, the ground, they pretty much do their standing on their own after that. But we're going to keep them in place.
Commercial printers go through it. Works out to like 16 cents a square foot for a nice aluminum.
These ones over here aren't as tight as the ones in the back, because this is sort of a hinged, faux hinge door right here, so you can move it back and forth. It'll still stay
perfect.
Connected.
And the purpose of the door is to keep out vermin or intruders, or? Yeah,
or if you have a lot of yard waste like leaves, a bin this size you can pack full, like I do that at the end of the year in my yard. I'm able to fill this container with leaves, and then it'll slowly work its way down. We got our bin, and one thing I like to do too, I'll put a little bit over here.
That's awesome.
Is some straw.
Well, this restores about a week. I've been using it religiously. Now I have a home for the...
It's nice.
Yeah, it's big.
Throw some twigs. I do that some straw and some twigs at the bottom so aeration can get under the pile. And I suppose this is a good enough time to talk about what compost is. By its name, compost is decomposition. And decomposition is a good thing, because if you imagine what the world would be like if your meals stayed around forever after you're done with them, it would not be that pleasant. But decomposition happens with a few things. Anything organic will decompose over time through air, oxygen, and water pressures. Compost creates a beneficial material that has nitrogen and carbon and lots of funguses and bacteria. How it works is you add your green materials, which would be things like your food waste, tea bags, grass clippings, vegetable peelings, old flowers, coffee grounds are green material, and greens are the nitrogen in your pile. Mixed with the browns, which are carbon, which can be like eggshells, egg and cereal boxes, cardboard, toilet kitchen roll tubes, garden prunings, straw and hay. Ashes from wood is considered a brown material, wool, woody clippings, and we'll have, after we get this workshop done, we'll post these materials at some point on our website. We don't have any handouts for today because being zero waste, we like people to print them out or use them or not, have them printed at all. So I guess what we could say, what can't go in there? Obviously, inorganic stuff shouldn't go in your compost bin, so plastics, metals are a big no-no, hazardous waste out of it. But as far as what we eat, meat and dairy products are typically a no-no for household compost bins. They create odors, and additionally, they also take a long time to break down. Unless you have something to really grind up the meat and the bones, they don't break down within a normal household bin because the heat isn't there. Also, weeds and seed heads can be troublesome too if you're going to use it in your garden, so try not to get those things in there. Some people say no cooked vegetables. I find they're okay as long as they're not drenched in oil. The oil, olive oils and different types of cooking oils will cause odors in your pile if they're abundant. And at that, I'll turn it over to you for care and maintenance of the compost pile.
Okay. Hi, so in order to make sure that your compost pile goes right and you get a nice batch of compost, which I brought some in that's nearly finished, and it's just pay attention to the color and the structure of this falling out of my hands. There's nothing matted together. If you can smell it and kiss it, it's good compost. What you want to remember who's actually behind making compost, which is, I jokingly refer to it as the FBI, which is the fungus, the bacteria, and the invertebrates. So if you're keeping the soil food web happy, if you're keeping what's in the soil happy, then you're going to get a nice compost. And there are other ways to do compost. You can do anaerobic compost, but we're not getting into that. Especially when you have neighbors, you want a good aerobic compost that smells good. And the way that you do that is you pay attention to the odor, the color, the structure of the compost. So you're going out and visiting your compost bin. A lot of the problems that you can have when you're managing compost are easily remedied. It's sort of like plants. When you're having trouble with your plants, it's usually either the temperature or the water. It's the same thing with the compost. It might be too wet, it might be too dry, it might be getting anaerobic, and the best ways to deal with that are to turn it, to rotate it.
Typically for most people it's going to be your shovel. Every 3
Right.
weeks, get in there and turn your pile and get air to it. Sometimes you can stick a tube of wire to keep air getting into your pile too. That's good. You don't want it to get anaerobic. It'll get smelly, start producing methane, and that's going to be counterproductive to the idea of compost. This thing, I like it because it prevents me from having to use my back. Stick it in, pull it out, stick it in, pull it out. I do that about 20 times around my pile and works wonders. So
Okay.
if you're in the village here, send me an email. You can borrow that for a day.
Right. And so the more aeration you have with your compost, the more it's going to smell earthy, and that's the smell that you want. It's going to smell like the actual organisms in there, the actinomycetes that you smell after a really nice rain. You smell that organism. in the soil. That's what that earthy, raining smell is. And then you want to pay attention to your acidity, and you don't necessarily have to check the pH of your compost, though you can. They now have at garden centers, they have pH testers. But you can tell if there are a lot of earthworms in your compost. That's a good thing because they like it slightly acidic. It should be slightly acidic. A lot of plant materials like it that way. It's difficult in Yellow Springs because we have a very alkaline soil, but your compost is going to be the best thing to remedy that, because it just by nature turns a little bit acidic usually if it's done right. And then a lot of people want to know, well, when is this ready to use? This is halfway done. You can go through it and see a seed here, or you can see some food in there still and be able to tell what it is. It's usually halfway done. This is a little over halfway done actually, but here I'm like pulling out, there's a little piece of a tomato. If this is how your compost looks by now, you can spread it in October and November, and it'll continue to break down, and then it'll kind of chill out for a while during the winter. And most organisms start living and growing at freezing, but they don't really become dynamic until about 50 degrees. So that compost will sit there chilled out on your garden, and then it'll start, really becoming active in the springtime, right when your plants need that extra juice. And the other thing about compost in the way it's used and managed is you want to make sure that you think of it sort of as a bank. So you're constantly adding to it. There are ways that the nitrogen, the phosphorus, the molybdenum, and all the different elements can be used by plants. Sometimes they're insoluble, sometimes they're not. Your pile's constantly being rained on, so some of that seeps out. So you're constantly just adding to that and turning it, and you're depositing these things into the soil. I cover my compost now. I never did before, but I cover it with something that is porous. I've got a little, it's called an earth bin, and it's got little holes in it, and I just flattened it down and put it on top. You don't have to. You might have rodents, you might have things like that. I've read in some books where it's good to cover it and keep it from the rain sometimes, and then let the rain hit it. That's really a preference, and it depends on if you're having a lot of pesky problems with raccoons or anything like that. Sometimes it helps to deter them. One of the easiest ways to get your compost to stop composting is to mat up a bunch of stuff and get a layer in there that is not decomposing. And this might seem, easily decomposed, but once a bunch of leaves get in there and it's matted together like that, it can stop, it can change things. And then you get a big layer. If you put a big layer of matted leaves down in there, and then you put a bunch of food waste in there, that's when you can get the anaerobic and the foul smelling stuff. So it's always good, if you can, to have chipped up leaves. But if you don't, you can always leave your leaves and let them sit, and they will compost themselves, and you can use them later when they're more broken up, or you can break them up with your hands. But it's always good to break that stuff up. And you don't have to take my word for it. I read a lot. Things change. People have different ideas. This book is only on vermicompost, which is worm bins. This is Worms Eat My Garbage. It's a very cute book, and the woman who wrote it is fantastic. This I just got, the Rodale Book of Composting, Easy Methods for Every Gardener. And this has 20 different compost bins. If you don't have wood pallets, if you want to do something else, if you're getting interested in trench composting, it's all in this book. It's a very comprehensive book. And this is one of my favorite books. It's sort of the amateur soil science book, because they have soil science textbooks, which I didn't bring, but this is Teeming with Microbes. And this talks about how to keep those FBI going, the fungus, the bacteria, and the invertebrates. So there are tons of books out there. Read up, and it becomes the sort of thing that you can experiment with.
And we'll post those 3 books on the website as well in the bibliography.
Manure is a source of nitrogen. Some of those troubleshooting points, if you get a bin If your bin gets filled up, one of the ways to tell if the compost is working is the heap starts lowering. It looks like you're losing, but you're gaining. If your heap just stays up here, it's not heating up. There's something going on. So one of the things you could do is you could add manure, you could add alfalfa meal, you could add grass clippings. The nitrogen, and Tom was talking about that, you want a good carbon to nitrogen ratio, so a good brown and green ratio, because you want that reactivity in there. So manure is good for that. Some people don't feel like they want animal manure in their compost.
Particularly high in nitrogen when it's fresh too. So
right,
if you
it's
can leave
always
it
good
to dry
to
before
compost
putting
it.
it in, that's
right.
probably help you out, just so you can add a little bit rather than overpowering your pile with a bunch of nitrogen.
And I should say that along with the manure, you want to compost. It's always good to compost the manure first, and it's got its own carbon nitrogen ratio because most manure comes with hay. Most manure comes with the bedding. So you get goat, horse, whatever, it's coming with that bedding. So it composts fairly well just being in a lump like your leaves. But you also want to do that if you take, I see this nice big soil. Some people like to take their piles of soil that they have in their yard or ditch scrapings, things like that when they get a new patio and they want to compost that. If you do it, don't put it in your compost right away. Put it in a pile and let it sit for the winter. Let it freeze. Let it aerate, let it do its thing. Don't put it right into the compost. Almost like you're letting it cure, like an onion or a gourd. You just let your soil or your manure cure, and then you add it into your compost.
We talk about moisture in the pile too.
Moisture is good, but too much isn't. Right? You can get dry pockets. Mm-hmm. You can get lazy, I think. I get lazy and I'm like, I'm not turning that pile when I know full well. I just added a bunch of green tea leaves, old, I'm a tea snob and I was like, this is old, I'm done with this. And I put it into the compost and I knew it was gonna dry out because it hasn't rained at all. And I let it sit for a little bit and lo and behold, I had a dry pocket today, not composting, just stuck in there in the middle. So you just always wanna make sure, an odor can tell you. A lot of times, if you start to smell really foul smell in there, you know that it's too wet or there's something anaerobic stuck in the middle of it. It might look dry, completely dry on top, but there's something in there that's not getting moisture, or not getting air and too much moisture. So the moisture, forces the oxygen out of the pile at times. Or the other way, if it's dry and there's no moisture, it's not composting.
Right. So I want to just tell you the touch. I kind of actually feel like a sponge once you've wrung it out, and then that feeling sort of wet and moist. You want it moist, but not, overly. You don't want it slimy. And for Ohio, an outdoor bin like this, you really don't have to worry about that too much. If you turn it regularly, we get rains frequently enough that it's going to add moisture, and we have moisture in our food and moisture in things that we're putting in the pile. So it usually takes care of itself, but if you have smells or dry pockets, you can balance those out with a little bit of water or adding some more dry stuff to the pile.